You people need to get out, right now. Officer, we're just having lunch. We just placed our order. What did we do wrong? I've received complaints. You're causing a disruption. You need to vacate these premises immediately. A disruption? Sir, we're sitting here quietly with our children. Who made a complaint? That's none of your business. Either you leave on your own or I'm placing you under arrest. Picture this scene for a moment. Really let it settle into your mind. A Sunday afternoon in suburban America. A family of 4 sitting in a booth at a neighborhood diner. Plates of food just arriving at their table. 2 children coloring on their kids' menus. Crayons scattered across the laminated surface. Parents enjoying a quiet meal after attending church services that morning. The smell of pancakes and coffee in the air. Gentle chatter filling the restaurant. And then a police officer walks in. He scans the room. His eyes land on one particular table. Without speaking to the manager, without asking questions, without any investigation whatsoever, he walks directly toward this family and demands they leave immediately or face arrest. Their crime, being black in a place where someone decided they didn't belong. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Sergeant Nathan Crawford believed he was responding to a legitimate call that afternoon. As a veteran patrol officer with the Riverside Hills Police Department in suburban Illinois, he took disturbance reports seriously, especially in what he considered family-friendly establishments where business owners wanted to maintain certain standards. When dispatch notified him about a disruptive family at Magnolia's Family Kitchen around noon on that cloudless Sunday, Crawford responded within 4 minutes flat. But the moment he walked through those glass doors and surveyed the restaurant, every biased instinct he'd nurtured over his 16-year career kicked into gear. He saw a black family of 4 sitting quietly in a corner booth, enjoying their meal just like every other patron in that dining room. They were the only black customers in the entire restaurant, and in Crawford's prejudiced mind, that meant they were automatically the problem. What Crawford didn't consider in that moment was the small device clipped to the center of his uniform chest. His body camera, department-issued equipment, automatically recording from the moment he'd stepped out of his patrol vehicle, capturing every single word he spoke, every gesture he made, every moment of his racial profiling in crystal-clear high-definition video with pristine audio quality. The very technology meant to protect officers from false accusations was about to become the irrefutable evidence that would destroy Crawford's career, strip him of his pension, send him to federal prison, and cost the city of Riverside Hills $1.5 million in settlement payments. Sergeant Nathan Crawford had worn a Riverside Hills police badge for 16 years. His personnel file described him as a dedicated community officer with an exemplary service record. His supervisors praised his initiative and responsiveness. On paper, he looked like exactly the kind of veteran cop you'd want patrolling your neighborhood. But that official narrative concealed a much darker pattern. Buried in Crawford's file were 27 separate complaints spanning 14 years of his career. Citizens had come forward again and again, alleging discriminatory enforcement, racial profiling, and harassment of minorities in public spaces. 27 times, people had walked into the Internal Affairs office and said this officer treated me differently because of the color of my skin. And 27 times, those complaints had been reviewed by investigators, stamped with bureaucratic language about insufficient evidence or misunderstandings, and quietly dismissed without any disciplinary action whatsoever. Crawford had learned the system intimately. He understood that as long as he claimed to be responding to a business owner's request or a citizen's complaint, his department would shield him from accountability. The magic words were always the same. I received a report of a disturbance. Those 7 words could justify almost anything. The Riverside Hills Police Department had implemented mandatory body cameras 4 years earlier, following a string of misconduct allegations that had embarrassed the mayor's office. The official policy was crystal clear. Officers were required to activate their body cameras for all civilian interactions, all calls for service, and all enforcement actions without exception. But in practice, officers sometimes conveniently forgot to turn them on. Cameras mysteriously malfunctioned at crucial moments. Battery life seemed to expire just when confrontations occurred. Crawford himself had failed to activate his camera on at least 15 documented occasions over the previous 4 years. Every single one of those instances involved interactions that later resulted in civilian complaints. Coincidence, he'd explained each time. Technical difficulties, memory lapses. But on this particular Sunday afternoon, whether out of routine habit or overconfidence, Crawford had activated his body camera the moment he stepped out of his patrol vehicle. He'd adjusted it on his chest. He'd confirmed the recording light was blinking. That reflexive action would prove to be his complete undoing. Dr. Raymond Williams was 43 years old and one of the most respected pediatric cardiovascular surgeons at Memorial Children's Hospital. His hands had saved the lives of hundreds of children, born with heart defects that would have been death sentences, just a generation ago. Hospital administrators regularly received letters from grateful parents who credited Dr. Williams with giving their sons and daughters a chance at life. He was brilliant, accomplished, and deeply committed to serving his community. His wife, Denise Williams, was 41 and a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the greater Chicago area. She specialized in mergers and acquisitions, representing Fortune 500 companies in deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her analytical mind and courtroom presence had made her a rising star in Illinois legal circles. Together, they lived in Riverside Hills' exclusive Creekstone Estates neighborhood, a community of million-dollar homes where manicured lawns stretched toward quiet streets. They were raising their 2 children, Isaiah, who had just turned 10, and Aliyah, a bright-eyed 8-year-old with her mother's quick smile, with an emphasis on education, dignity, and the understanding that they would need to work twice as hard to receive half the credit in America. They were accomplished professionals who had achieved everything the American dream promised. They were devoted parents who attended every school event. They were pillars of their community who volunteered and donated generously. But they were also black. And that single fact meant they regularly encountered people who saw their skin color before they saw their credentials, their achievements, or their humanity. The Sunday in question had begun like so many others. The Williams family attended the 11 o'clock service at Grace Baptist Church, where Dr. Williams served as a deacon and Denise sang in the gospel choir. The sermon had been about perseverance through adversity. The congregation had shared fellowship afterward. It had been a peaceful, spiritual morning. As they walked to their car, the children begged for a restaurant lunch, and Denise suggested Magnolia's Family Kitchen. It was a Riverside Hills institution, a classic American diner that had been serving pancakes and burgers since 1967. The kind of place with vinyl booths, chrome trim, and a rotating display of homemade pies behind the counter. The Williams family had eaten there twice before without any issues. Isaiah loved their chocolate chip pancakes. Aliyah couldn't get enough of their grilled cheese sandwiches. They arrived at 12:15 that afternoon. The parking lot was full of the after-church crowd, families in their Sunday best, enjoying a leisurely meal before heading home. Inside, the diner buzzed with conversation and the clatter of dishes. A hostess smiled warmly and led them to a booth near the large front window. They settled in comfortably. Denise helped Aliyah arrange her crayons. Raymond pointed out the specials on the chalkboard. Isaiah studied the menu with serious concentration. A waitress brought waters and took their drink orders, chatting pleasantly about the weather. Everything felt perfectly normal. Just another Sunday. Just another family enjoying time together. And then Denise noticed a white couple in the adjacent booth staring at them with undisguised hostility. She didn't say anything at first. She'd learned long ago to ignore those kinds of looks, the uncomfortable glances, the slight narrowing of eyes, the silent judgments made by strangers who had already decided something about you before you'd spoken a single word. She focused on her menu and pretended not to notice. But the staring continued, growing more intense. The couple whispered to each other, their body language unmistakable in its disapproval. The woman shook her head, with visible displeasure. The man's jaw tightened with something that looked disturbingly like anger. Then they stood up, walked to the counter near the cash register, and spoke urgently with someone who appeared to be a manager. The conversation lasted perhaps 2 minutes. The manager nodded several times, glanced toward the Williams family's booth, and reached for the phone behind the register. 5 minutes later, Sergeant Nathan Crawford pushed through the front door. The body camera footage that would later be played in federal court captured exactly what Crawford saw when he entered that restaurant. A peaceful dining room filled with families enjoying their Sunday lunch. Quiet conversations at every table. Children laughing and playing. The pleasant clink of silverware against ceramic plates. Not a single sign of disturbance anywhere. The camera panned slowly across the space as Crawford surveyed the scene from the entrance. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing requiring police intervention. And then the frame stopped moving. It had landed on the Williams family. The only black customers in the entire restaurant. Without a moment's hesitation, without checking with the manager, without asking a single question about what the alleged disturbance might be, Crawford walked directly toward their booth. The footage captured his deliberate approach, the way his right hand moved instinctively to rest on his duty belt near his sidearm, his shoulders squared and posture aggressive. "You people need to get out. Right now." Crawford's voice was loud enough the customers at nearby tables turned to look. The body camera recorded the sudden silence that fell over that section of the restaurant. It captured the Williams family's faces looking up in confusion and dawning fear. Raymond's fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Denise's hand reaching protectively toward her daughter. Isaiah's eyes going wide. "Officer, we're just having lunch," Raymond said, his voice remarkably steady despite the shock coursing through him. "We just placed our order. What did we do wrong?" The camera's microphone picked up every nuance in his voice. The effort to remain calm, the underlying fear that any black man in America feels when confronted by armed police, the genuine bewilderment of someone who cannot fathom what he could have done to deserve this treatment. "I've received complaints that you're causing a disruption," Crawford said. The camera recorded his aggressive tone, the way he loomed over the seated family. "You need to vacate these premises immediately." Denise's voice wavered despite her years of courtroom experience. "A disruption, officer. We're sitting here quietly with our children. We haven't raised our voices. Who made a complaint? What specifically did they say we did?" The body camera captured her wiping her eyes quickly, fighting to maintain composure in front of Isaiah and Aaliyah. In that moment, she wasn't a high-powered attorney. She was a mother trying to protect her children from something they should never have to witness. "That's none of your concern," Crawford said dismissively. "Either you leave voluntarily right now, or this becomes an arrest situation. Your choice." "But we paid for our food," Raymond's voice cracked slightly. "We haven't done anything wrong. Can you please just tell us what someone said we did?" The camera captured 10-year-old Isaiah looking up at his father, watching the man who saved children's lives for a living be treated like a criminal for eating lunch. The footage showed a child's face transforming in real time, confusion giving way to fear, innocence beginning to comprehend something ugly about the world. The audio picked up 8-year-old Aaliyah beginning to cry softly. "Daddy, what's happening? Why is the policeman mad at us?" Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again," Crawford said, his tone hardening into unmistakable threat. "You and your family need to leave this establishment immediately, or I will arrest all of you for trespassing." Denise pulled her daughter close, her own eyes filling with tears. The body camera recorded the entire scene, a family being humiliated, 2 children being traumatized, parents being threatened with arrest for the crime of eating lunch while black. And then, before Raymond could respond, a voice cut through the tension. "Officer Crawford, what the hell's going on here?" The body camera swiveled as Crawford turned toward the sound, capturing a man emerging from the kitchen area. He was white, somewhere in his late 60s, with a graying beard and calloused hands that spoke of decades working in a commercial kitchen. He wore an apron stained with flour and grease, and his expression radiated alarm and righteous anger. This was George Brennan, the actual owner of Magnolia's Family Kitchen for 31 years, and he had absolutely no idea that anyone had called the police. George had owned this diner since 1993, back when the neighborhood was still working class, and the restaurant served mechanics and factory workers. He'd watched Riverside Hills transform around him. Through it all, he'd kept the diner running on the same principles: good food at fair prices, and everyone welcome through the door. "Mr. Brennan," Crawford said, his confidence unshaken, "I received a call about a disturbance. I'm handling it." "A disturbance?" George moved closer, now centered in the body camera frame. "From who?" "I've been in the kitchen for an hour. Nobody told me about any disturbance. I didn't call any police." Crawford gestured vaguely. "One of your customers called it in. They said these people were causing problems. They need to leave." George's face twisted with disgust as understanding dawned. He walked past Crawford toward the Williams family's booth. "Dr. Williams, Mrs. Williams, have you been causing any problems? Here?" "No, sir," Raymond said, his voice steadier now. "We've been sitting here eating with our kids. We haven't bothered anyone." George turned back toward Crawford, positioning himself between the officer and the family. The body camera recorded his protective stance. "Then there's no disturbance, and these folks aren't going anywhere. They're paying customers who ordered food from my menu. They've done nothing wrong." The camera captured Crawford's hands tensing. "Mr. Brennan, I received a legitimate complaint. These people need to leave." "From who?" George demanded, his voice rising loud enough that the entire restaurant could hear. "Show me. Point to the person who made this complaint." Crawford pointed toward an empty booth. "They were customers who—" "Who left?" George interrupted, stepping forward. "And even if they were still here, I don't remove paying customers from my diner because some other customer doesn't like looking at them. That's not how I run my business. If you were in George Brennan's shoes right now, facing down an armed police officer making thinly veiled threats, would you back down to avoid trouble? Or would you stand your ground for strangers you barely knew?" The body camera captured Crawford stepping closer to George, his voice dropping to a threatening register. "Mr. Brennan, I suggest you reconsider your position here. The Riverside Hills Police Department has enjoyed a good relationship with your business for many years. You wouldn't want that relationship to change." There it was, the threat, captured in perfect audio clarity by Crawford's own recording equipment: cooperate with discrimination or face consequences from the police department. George's expression changed visibly as the implications sank in. and the exact moment he decided he didn't care about the consequences. Before George could respond, another voice entered the conversation. The body camera swiveled as Crawford turned, capturing Denise Williams rising from the booth, her cell phone held up and clearly recording. Officer Crawford. Denise's hands were shaking, but her voice had transformed completely. The fearful mother had retreated, replaced by the courtroom attorney who had spent 15 years learning exactly how to handle adversarial situations. I'm Denise Williams. I'm an attorney licensed to practice in the state of Illinois, and I'm recording this interaction. The body camera captured the profound irony, Denise recording the officer, while that same officer's camera simultaneously recorded her recording him. Two parallel documentations of the same discriminatory encounter. You've just threatened a business owner for refusing to discriminate against my family, Denise continued, her voice growing stronger. We haven't broken any laws. If you arrest us, there will be consequences. Civil rights violations, false arrest, discrimination under color of law. She pointed at his chest. Your own camera has been running this entire time. I've been watching that little red light since you approached our table. Crawford's camera view shifted downward as he involuntarily glanced at his body camera, the device that had documented every racist assumption, every threatening word. Ma'am, put that phone away or I'll confiscate it, Crawford said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. For what? Denise asked calmly. Recording police activity in public is legal under Illinois law. You know that. Threatening to confiscate my phone would be an additional civil rights violation. So think carefully about your next move. George stepped back into the frame. Officer, I'm saying this one more time. These customers are welcome in my restaurant. They have done nothing wrong. I'm asking you, as the owner of this establishment, to leave my diner. Now. The body camera recorded the longest 10 seconds of Nathan Crawford's career. He stood there, captured on his own recording, facing a choice that would define everything that followed. You're making a mistake, Crawford finally said, the camera capturing his retreat. Both of you. You'll regret this. The footage followed his movement as he walked toward the door, capturing the relieved murmurs from customers, the scattered applause that broke out as he left. What Crawford didn't comprehend was the magnitude of what his body camera had recorded. Every discriminatory word, every threatening gesture, every moment of the Williams family's humiliation. The device meant to protect him had instead documented exactly what kind of officer he really was. Crawford returned to his patrol vehicle and sat behind the wheel for several minutes, his body camera still running. The footage would later show him staring straight ahead, jaw clenched, clearly processing what had happened. When he finally deactivated the camera, he drove back to headquarters to file his report. The report he wrote that afternoon was a masterpiece of selective truth and careful omission, the kind of creative writing Crawford had perfected over 16 years. According to his official account, he had responded to a legitimate disturbance call. Upon arrival, he had identified the source of the reported disruption and attempted to resolve the situation peacefully. The family in question had agreed to leave after the nature of the complaint was explained to them. The business owner had been cooperative and appreciative of police assistance. The report made no mention of George Brennan ordering him to leave. No mention of Denise Williams asserting her legal rights. No mention of Crawford threatening the business owner with police retaliation. No mention of the family being entirely peaceful. It was a complete fiction designed to justify his actions, written by a man who had written similar fictions many times before. In his experience, no one ever checked. But Crawford had made one critical miscalculation. His body camera footage told an entirely different story. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story and share your thoughts in the comments. 3 days after the incident, Raymond and Denise Williams walked into the Riverside Hills Police Department headquarters and filed a formal complaint. They brought Denise's cell phone video, along with 7 other videos from customers who had witnessed the confrontation. They brought photographs of their children's devastated faces. They brought a written statement from George Brennan. When Internal Affairs pulled Crawford's body camera footage and compared it to his written report, what they saw contradicted his account in every significant detail. The Williams family's attorneys filed public records requests within 2 weeks. They demanded access to all of Crawford's body camera footage from disturbance calls over the previous 4 years. They requested his complete personnel file. They wanted internal communications regarding responses to calls involving minorities. What they received painted a damning picture of systematic discrimination enabled by institutional indifference. Of the 93 times Crawford had activated his body camera for business disturbance calls, 77 involved complaints about people of color. The footage showed a strikingly consistent pattern. Crawford approaching minority customers, making immediate assumptions of wrongdoing, threatening arrest, and forcibly removing people despite business owners confirming there was no actual problem. In 14 other instances where complaints had been filed against Crawford, his body camera had mysteriously not been activated. The investigation expanded rapidly. Crawford had responded to similar calls at 12 other businesses. In total, body camera footage and witness testimony documented that he had removed or threatened 53 people of color over his career based on transparently racist complaints. 53 people. 53 families humiliated in public spaces. 53 times when someone's day was destroyed by an officer who saw their skin color and assumed the worst. Internal emails revealed that Crawford's supervising sergeant, Dennis Howard, was fully aware of the pattern. In one exchange, Crawford had asked Howard for guidance on handling complaints about undesirable elements in local businesses. Howard's response was devastating. Use your discretion. If business owners want assistance maintaining their clientele standards, we support them within the law. Maintaining their clientele standards. In other words, helping business owners keep certain people out. That email, combined with the body camera evidence, proved departmental knowledge and tacit approval of Crawford's discriminatory enforcement. The United States Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois opened a federal civil rights investigation. Sergeant Nathan Crawford was arrested 6 months after the incident at Magnolia's family kitchen. Federal agents took him into custody at his home early one Tuesday morning in front of his wife and teenage son. The charges were severe. Multiple counts of conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights under 18 U.S.C. Section 241, and multiple counts of deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242. These weren't local misdemeanors. These were federal felonies carrying years in federal prison. Sergeant Dennis Howard was charged as a co-conspirator. The federal trial lasted 3.5 weeks. The prosecution's case was built almost entirely on evidence Crawford himself had created. His body camera footage that proved his written reports were lies. Day after day, the jury watched Crawford's recordings on courtroom monitors. They saw him enter Magnolia's family kitchen, scan the room, and zero in on the only black family present. They watched him ignore the evidence of their peaceful behavior. They heard him threaten them with arrest. They watched George Brennan order him to leave. They heard him threaten the business owner. Then prosecutors played footage from 17 other incidents. Different days, different businesses, different families, always the same pattern. 47 victims testified during the trial. One by one, they described their experiences. Lunch dates ruined, family celebrations destroyed, children traumatized, the lasting fear of entering public spaces. George Brennan testified about Crawford's threatening behavior and his attempt to use police power to intimidate a business owner into compliance with discrimination. Statistical experts presented data showing that Crawford's enforcement pattern could not be explained by any factor other than racial bias. The numbers were stark. The targeting was obvious. The discrimination was systematic. The defense argued that Crawford had acted on legitimate complaints each time. He was just doing his job. He was responding to calls from concerned citizens. But the body camera footage contradicted that defense at every turn. The video showed peaceful families. It showed no disturbances. It showed immediate targeting based solely on race. Crawford's own equipment had documented exactly what he was doing and why. Crawford rejected multiple plea offers during the trial. He insisted, right up until the jury began deliberations, that he had done nothing wrong. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict: guilty on multiple counts of conspiracy to deprive citizens of their civil rights. Guilty on multiple counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. Sergeant Nathan Crawford was sentenced to 3 years and 8 months in federal prison. Dennis Howard, who had pleaded guilty before trial, received 14 months. The criminal prosecution addressed personal accountability, but the Williams family civil lawsuit addressed the institutional failures that had allowed this pattern of discrimination to flourish for 16 years. Their attorneys sued Crawford personally, Sergeant Howard, the Riverside Hills Police Department, and the city of Riverside Hills. The claims were comprehensive. Civil rights violations under Section 1983, intentional infliction of emotional distress, negligent supervision, and systemic discrimination enabled by municipal policy. Crawford's own body camera footage made settlement negotiations remarkably brief. The city's attorneys knew the video was indefensible. They'd watched it. They'd seen exactly what happened. They'd seen their officer target a peaceful family, threaten them with arrest, attempt to intimidate the business owner, and make racist assumptions that his own recording equipment had documented in perfect clarity. There was no jury in America that would side with the city after watching that footage. The case settled for $1.5 million. That figure represented compensation for the Williams family's direct damages, the humiliation they suffered, the psychological trauma inflicted on their children, the lasting impact on their sense of safety in their own community. Isaiah had developed anxiety about entering public spaces. Aaliyah had nightmares about police officers taking her parents away. Raymond and Denise struggled with the knowledge that their children's innocence had been shattered in a single Sunday afternoon. But the settlement included provisions that went far beyond monetary compensation. The city agreed to fundamental reforms: creation of an independent civilian oversight board with full investigative authority, the power to subpoena records, compel testimony, and recommend disciplinary action independent of internal affairs. Mandatory bias training for all officers with quarterly assessments and consequences for failure. Not a single half-day seminar, but ongoing, comprehensive education. Strict body camera activation requirements with severe penalties for non-compliance. Every officer interaction, every call for service, every enforcement action, no exceptions. Civilian oversight review of all body camera footage from business-related calls. Every time an officer responded to a complaint about a customer at a business, that footage would be reviewed by people who weren't police officers. Demographic data collection on all customer removals from businesses with public quarterly reporting. The community would know exactly who was being asked to leave, who was being threatened, who was being targeted. A zero-tolerance policy for selective enforcement with documentation. Requirements. Think about this for a moment. It took 16 years, 27 complaints, 53 victims, and one family willing to fight back before any of this changed. How many families before the Williamses just walked away? How many people endured this treatment and never filed a complaint because they didn't believe anything would happen? The settlement also established a fund to compensate the 53 other documented victims. $400,000 was set aside to locate and provide restitution to people whose encounters with Crawford had never resulted in formal complaints, but had been captured on his own body camera footage. George Brennan's diner saw increased business in the months following the incident. Customers came from across the region specifically to support the business owner who had stood up for what was right. They came to shake his hand. They came to tell him they respected what he'd done. George implemented a new policy prominently displayed near the entrance. All customers are welcome at Magnolia's Family Kitchen. We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Every person who walks through our door will be treated with dignity and respect. He gave interviews to local and national media, always returning to the same theme. I've been running this diner for 31 years. When you run a business that serves the public, your job is to serve the public. All of them, not just the ones who look like you. The Williams family used a portion of their settlement to establish the Williams Equal Access Foundation. The organization provides legal representation to discrimination victims who cannot afford attorneys. It funds education programs about civil rights. It supports advocacy for police reform. Raymond and Denise decided that their family's experience should create something positive. Dr. Raymond Williams continued his work at Memorial Children's Hospital, saving lives. Healing hearts. Denise returned to her practice at Morrison & Associates. They raised Isaiah and Aaliyah with an understanding of both the injustice that exists in America and the possibility of changing it through persistence and courage. Both children received counseling to address the trauma of that Sunday afternoon. Isaiah eventually wrote an essay about the experience for a school assignment, describing what it felt like to watch his father, a man who saved children's lives for a living, be treated like a criminal for eating lunch. His teacher submitted the essay to a statewide writing competition. It won first place. Aaliyah took longer to process what had happened. For months, she was afraid to go to restaurants. She would ask her parents repeatedly, every time they left the house, whether police would come and make them leave. It took almost a year of therapy before she could walk into a public establishment without her heart racing. Sergeant Nathan Crawford served his federal sentence at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania. According to people familiar with his case, he maintained throughout his incarceration that he had done nothing wrong. He had been following procedure. He had been responding to legitimate complaints. He had been targeted by activists and attorneys with an agenda. He never apologized to the Williams family. He never apologized to the 52 other families he had targeted over 16 years. He never acknowledged that his own body camera had captured exactly what kind of officer he really was. When released after serving approximately 30 months, he returned to Illinois, but not to Riverside Hills. He could not find work in law enforcement. He could not find work in security. His federal conviction followed him everywhere. The irony was not lost on civil rights advocates who followed this case closely. Nathan Crawford had activated his body camera that Sunday afternoon because department policy required it. He'd adjusted it on his chest. He'd confirmed the recording light was blinking. He'd done everything right from a procedural standpoint, completely confident that he was acting legitimately by responding to a citizen's complaint. That body camera, designed and deployed to protect officers from false accusations, instead became the primary evidence of Crawford's systematic discrimination. His own equipment recorded his bias. His own microphone captured his threats. His own video documented his pattern of targeting minorities for 16 years. The lesson was clear to anyone willing to learn it. Body cameras work both ways. They can protect officers who act with integrity and fairness, but they also document officers who abuse their authority. And when an officer's own body camera captures him discriminating against a peaceful family sitting down to Sunday lunch, there is no defense, no excuse, no way to spin the narrative. Crawford walked into Magnolia's family kitchen, expecting to do what he'd done dozens of times before. He expected to approach a black family, demand they leave, and watch them comply out of fear. He expected the business owner to stay quiet. He expected to write a report justifying his actions and move on. He forgot that his own camera was recording everything. His 16-year career ended in federal prison. His pension evaporated. His reputation collapsed. The very equipment meant to protect him became the instrument of his destruction. The Williams family walked into that same restaurant expecting nothing more than a peaceful Sunday lunch. They expected chocolate chip pancakes and grilled cheese sandwiches. They expected their children to color on kids' menus while the adults talked about the week ahead. Instead, they experienced blatant discrimination. They were targeted, threatened, and humiliated in front of their children. They watched their son's face transform as he understood something ugly about the world. They held their daughter as she cried and asked why the policeman was mad at them. But they didn't back down. They filed complaints. They hired attorneys. They fought through a system that had protected Nathan Crawford for 16 years. And in the end, his own body camera provided the evidence that held him accountable. This story is about the intersection of injustice and technology, of prejudice and accountability. It's about what happens when someone's bias is captured in high definition, recorded by their own equipment, preserved for courts and juries and the public to see. The Williams family didn't set out to become civil rights advocates. They just wanted to eat lunch. George Brennan didn't set out to become a symbol of moral courage. He just ran his diner the way he'd always run it. And Nathan Crawford didn't set out to become an example of what happens when discrimination meets documentation. He just forgot his own camera was running. Sometimes the most important moments in the struggle for justice happen not because people planned them, but because ordinary situations revealed extraordinary truths. A family ordering pancakes, a business owner defending his customers against an armed officer, a body camera silently recording what its wearer never intended anyone to see. These moments remind us that change is possible, that accountability can happen, that even when systems are designed to protect the powerful, the truth has a way of emerging. The Williams family's courage, George Brennan's integrity, and the undeniable evidence of Crawford's own camera combined to create a moment of justice in a world that often denies it. For every family that walks into a restaurant wondering if they belong, for every parent who has had to explain discrimination to their children, for every person who has been made to feel unwelcome in spaces that should welcome everyone, this story matters. It shows that fighting back is worth it, that documentation is power, that one family's refusal to accept injustice can create change that protects countless others. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, I'm asking you to take a moment right now. Hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. Leave a comment and tell me what struck you most. What would you have done in the Williams family's position? In George Brennan's position? What does this case tell you about policing in America? About technology? About the possibility of change? Subscribe to RealTales if you haven't already. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story. Because tomorrow we have another case that shows how the technology meant to protect can also expose the truth. These stories need to be told. These families deserve to have their experiences heard. And your support, your likes, your comments, your subscriptions, that's what makes it possible for us to keep bringing these stories to light. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. Until next time.